I have been reading all of these books, and you have been lied to. Show Don't Tell is the ungodly hammer with which all new writers are bludgeoned repeatedly until they run back to their mothers and they say, "Mum, I'm scared," to which their mother says, "Don't tell me, show me." And here's the thing, it's not always true. Now, Show Don't Tell is a massive topic, so we're gonna narrow it down to a teensy-weensy, tiny, come here, a little closer, tiny, whiny little part of it, and that is writing character emotions. And two big mistakes writers make when doing it. Let's go. And because learning never ends, I've started a series of companion videos called Beyond Writing. This time it's exploring more emotions, more stories, more examples like how Stephen King creates fear, The Hunger Games, and some of my own writing as well. And you can get this ongoing series with the Nebula Curiosity Stream bundle, which right now is 42% off, just $12 for the entire year. And this is a really cool sponsor for me because I'm able to sponsor my own video with my own stuff. It'd mean a lot to check it out. Part 1. Tell, don't show. Us writers easily fall into this trap of thinking there's an emotion iceberg where you've got telling at the top, she felt happy with herself, then physicalizing like clenching fists, and a little deeper it's describing the feeling in the abstract, then character action, then introspection, and we always want to be as deep in the iceberg as possible. But no. I mean, can you imagine if every emotion your characters felt had to come out in these sentences or even paragraphs of prose? Your pace would be slower than the Russian advance into Ukraine, not to mention melodramatic with every emotion being this big moment. No, there is absolutely a place for telling. Your characters are feeling things all the time, and not all of those feelings are important. Listen to this piece from Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
The pond is next, I thought. I just have to go around this shed and I'll see it. I saw it and felt oddly proud of myself, as if that one act of memory had blown away some of the cobwebs of the day.
This character feels proud for remembering something from their childhood, just a dash of it. It's not a big emotion, it's not something we should narratively dwell on, so Gaiman just tells us, and he hides it in amongst some interesting language that fits in with the wider themes of the scene, someone rediscovering their childhood home. Telling in small moments, as well in transitions between scenes, is okay. But don't get too excited. Showing is the way that we get readers to care about our characters and their experiences, so you've gotta know when to show and not tell. And that, in my mind, really begins with Part 2, Specificity. Emotions are so much more than anger or sadness or happiness. You can have a sadness that just hits you for a moment, or a sadness that is the first thing you feel when you wake up in the morning before you even remember what you are sad about. It's on a spectrum that goes 1,000 different ways because all of these emotions can come in so many forms. Listen to this piece from Margaret Atwood's The Testaments.
I feared I might lose my faith. If you've never had a faith, you will not understand what that means. You feel as if your best friend is dying, that everything that defined you is being burned away, that you'll be left all alone. You feel exiled, as if you are lost in a dark wood. It was like the feeling I'd had when Tabitha died. The world was emptying itself of meaning. Everything was hollow. Everything was withering.
Atwood here is describing sadness in the abstract for a character who is losing their religion, but it's so much more than that. It's layered with loss of identity, of direction, of depersonalization. She isn't just showing us sadness, but a specific kind of long-lasting pain that leaves you questioning what you are left with in the wake of it. Her specificity here helps create a unique experience that we can engage with, and that's immersive, right? Rather than just saying the sadness was an abyss, a general statement. Because there's not much point in showing emotion in writing, but not getting to the heart of what that actual emotion is. Look at her word choice here. The words here are specific, they're evocative, they have multiple meanings behind them. Now, Atwood could have written here, "It's like everything defined you is dying," but she chose the words "burned away." It's more active, that something or someone is doing the burning to her. And it's painful because dying as a word doesn't necessarily mean that it's painful, and it can be passive. You feel exiled is such a great expression compared to you feel alone. It carries a lot more weight. Then the world is emptying itself of meaning and hollow and withering. They're such powerful words compared to just saying that she felt empty, which is something I see a lot in books. It's kinda overused. Clichés kinda lose their effect on readers. We glance over them when reading. They don't carry the weight or meaning that they used to or are meant to, and Atwood here avoids them. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course. In Enrique Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, a traumatized German soldier in World War I describes reading a letter from a soldier that he just killed in this way. But each word I translate pierces me like a shot to the chest, like a stab to the chest. Now, you would be right to point out that this is a cliche, but this passage really captures the horror and guilt and sadness with language that arises from war, and even more so, by correcting it to a stab rather than a bullet, it makes the death more personal. A bullet is inherently impersonal, it puts space between you and the person killed, and this is about him realizing that this man he just killed was a real person with a real life of their own. In this context, the cliche fits. It brings him a lot closer to him. It's really quite profound. Sometimes your word choice is just personal style though. Like Hemingway takes to much simpler word choices than say Jorge Luis Borges. And in first person, the word choice is really gonna come from the words that the perspective character would use, right? You could say, my dear children, that emotions are complicated. And in being mindful about word choice and specificity, you're going to want to look out for the words very or extremely when describing emotion. Stephen King hates adverbs like these because they often mean that you're not quite being specific enough with the emotion you're playing with. You're not capturing the scale you intend. And we don't tend to get anything more out of being told that someone was very afraid versus afraid. And by the way, I counted, and King only uses these terms 10 times outside dialogue when he's describing things in his book Misery. I don't actually have Misery here with me, so you're stuck with Salem's Lot. So do go through your book, Control F, and maybe instead of very tired, try exhausted, sleepy, drained, sick of it. These all mean more specific things. Likewise, look out for filter words. Felt, saw, realized, knew. These create psychological distance between the reader and the character, their emotions, by reminding them that this is a story. If specificity is about bringing you closer to the exact emotion of your characters, then cutting these words out is one way to close that gap as well. And with all of this in mind, it's really important to hug your cat. Go and pick them up right now, give them a cuddle, cradle them like the baby that they want to be. Yeah, this is what Momo loves. Momo loves this. You do, I love you. Writing. It's really important to, Part 3, show, not tell. Yes, we are here at last.
Lyra clenched herself, but relaxed almost at once as Pantaleimon thought to her, we're only safe as long as we pretend. She opened her eyes and found that they'd been containing tears, and to her surprise and shame, she sobbed and sobbed.
Philip Pullman could have told us that Lyra was anxious and afraid, but he didn't. Instead, he showed us by physicalizing these emotions. Lyra clenched herself, she shut her eyes, she sobbed and sobbed. It brings those emotions to life, and it is a pretty simple and easy way to improve your writing. If you Control F your story for words like happy, sad, anxious, afraid, you'll find plenty of places that you can hug your cat. You can go and pick them up right now, give them lots of love, maybe a treat, and they'll be very happy for it. You'll find places that you can spice it up. But as said, describing your emotions in the abstract or physicalizing them too much can grind the pace of your story on a line-by-line basis to a halt, because you're forcing the story to stay in the same moment, even if it doesn't feel natural to. And that's why character action is sometimes a better way to communicate emotion.
Leslie, dead, girl, friend, rope, broke, fell, you. The words exploded in his head like corn against the sides of a popper. God, dead, you, Leslie, dead, you. He ran until he was stumbling, but he kept on, afraid to stop, knowing somehow that running was the only thing that could keep Leslie from being dead. It was up to him. He had to keep going. He leaned his weight upon the door of the pickup and let his head thud against the window. His father drove stiffly without speaking, though once he cleared his throat as though he were going to say something, but he glanced at Les and closed his mouth. When they pulled up at his house, his father sat quietly, and Jess could feel the man's uncertainty, so he opened the door and got out, and with the numbness flooding through him, went in and lay down on his bed.
That was Catherine. It was Catherine Patterson's Bridge to Terabithia, which I don't have any unresolved feelings about. We do get a little bit of him describing these emotions in the abstract with the numbness flooding through him, but unlike in the Testaments or the Northern Lights, the emotion is primarily communicated by what Jesse does here. We have him running till he stumbles, refusing to stop, letting his head thud against the window. We are shown his frantic panic and fear and denial and giving up that crucially keep up the pace of the scene, because this is meant to feel like we're falling, a rush of emotions in the worst way possible. So if you've got fast-paced scenes where stopping to describe emotions in the abstract or physicalizing might undermine the tension that it relies on characters doing things in the moment, or that you want this moment to be a whirlwind, then character action might work better. Though the fact that these different strategies create different paces in your writing can be really useful. It can be used to mark a shift in the narrative pace following an emotional beat, if you want to suddenly speed it up or suddenly slow it down. Finally, show narrative consequences to your big emotions. Simply having characters do things or feel things isn't always enough if what they do or feel doesn't really matter. You know, Jesse's actions drive the story forward here by forcing other characters to react. His father has to come get him. It shows us how their emotions fit into this world in a real, tangible way. It makes them more real. Especially in character-driven stories, being able to identify the emotion that your characters end up with at the end of a scene and how that emotion affects the following scene, even if it's in just a small way, is a really great kind of thing to be able to do. It just lets you see the emotional connective tissue throughout your story. Feelings lead to action, lead to feelings, lead to action, lead to feelings, lead to blah blah blah, until those feelings are resolved. And it deepens the emotional experience, bringing us closer to the character. See, if you're just describing a lot of emotions, you know, they're just feeling bad and depressed and horrible all the time, but this doesn't really affect what they do that much, people just kind of blur over it, you know? You want a variety of all of these tactics, of course, but the golden rule with showing is generally describe the symptoms of the emotion, not the emotion itself, whether those symptoms are actions or physicalization or dwelling in their head. But here is the weird thing I found when researching most, and yes, I mean most, of the really good emotional writing in all of these stories doesn't come from physicalization or describing in the abstract or even character action a lot of the time. See, it's a lot deeper than that. And this is Part 4, the big mistake writers make. I have seen this so many times, I cannot even tell you, but it's particularly common, I feel, in science fiction and fantasy, because a lot of writers kind of fall into this pattern, this trap, where they will 1. Describe the setting, 2. Describe the conflict in the setting, and 3. Describe the emotion that comes out of that conflict. You know, rinse and repeat, scene to scene. It is an easy formula to fall into. That is the place that people naturally are most inclined to think about emotions. But I want to challenge you here. I want to challenge you to use emotions more complexly in all parts of your writing too. All 3 of these kind of beats you've got here. The Paper Menagerie is a beautiful, magical realist story about a Chinese American boy who grows up to resent his Chinese heritage and mother.
If my mom spoke to me in Chinese, I refused to answer her. After a while, she tried to use more English, but her accent and broken sentences embarrassed me. I tried to correct her. Eventually, she stopped speaking altogether if I was around. Mom began to mime things if she needed to let me know something. She tried to hug me the way she saw American mothers did on TV. I thought her movements exaggerated, uncertain, ridiculous, graceless. She saw that I was annoyed and stopped. Every once in a while, I would see her at the kitchen table, studying the plain side of a sheet of wrapping paper. Later, a new paper animal would appear on my nightstand and try to cuddle up to me. I caught them, squeezed them until the air went out of them, and then stuffed them away in the box in the attic.
Emotions here in Ken Liu's writing aren't just things being experienced inside scenes in that third beat after a lot of build-up, they're the connective tissue between scenes. Liu doesn't describe the embarrassment in the abstract or with body language, he instead moves the plot forward by describing a chain of emotional decisions, trying to correct her, getting annoyed with her hugs, strangling her origami pieces. They slowly escalate and build on one another in this kind of transition or summary that sets up the next scene where his mother dies and leaves him a letter in Chinese that he cannot even read because he refused to learn the language for her. So this is kind of that first beat and those beginning scenes. Alan Brock, a traditional professional editor, has a second point that I think is really valuable to consider here. Most writers do not need to get better at describing emotion. They need to get better at introspection. I think all of Haruki Murakami's stories in Men Without Women do this really well.
They shook hands goodbye. Takasuki's hand was soft, with long, slender fingers. His palm was warm and slightly damp, as if he had been sweating. Perhaps he was nervous. After he left, Kafuku sat down on a chair in the green room, opened his right hand, and stared at his palm. The sensation left by the handshake was still fresh. That hand, those fingers, had caressed his wife's naked body, slowly and deliberately, exploring every nook and cranny. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. What in heaven's name was she trying to do? He felt that, whatever it was, he had no choice but to go ahead and do it.
Now this story is about a man meeting the guy who his dead wife slept with, trying to figure out what this guy had that he didn't. There are complicated emotions at play, right? Resentment, pain, loss, self-blame, but instead of describing or physicalizing any of these, he captures them through this introspection here that is layered with emotional subtext. And to really look at how he does this, we've got to look at what Murakami focuses on in his prose here. Because when we are happy or sad, we don't think, oh, I'm happy, or oh, I'm sad. We think about the things that make us feel that way. So Murakami doesn't write, he had never been so jealous. He thinks about the feel of this man's hand that his wife would have once felt too, sensually. He doesn't describe the bar or the man's hair or his eyes because sex is a very physical act that is brought out through the hands in a way, you know. And this is almost a way of getting closer to understanding that. And what you focus on in your prose applies everywhere in your writing, not just in your character's introspective thoughts. When you describe a setting, a person, an event. If your character is in a forest, do they focus on the shadows or the pretty mushrooms? These have different emotional connotations. Have a look at how a town, just a town, is described in Frederick Buckman's Bear Town.
Maya wakes up and stays in bed, playing her guitar. The walls of her room are covered in a mixture of pencil drawings and tickets she's saved from concerts she's been to in cities far from here. Beartown isn't close to anything. It's as if nature and man were fighting a tug of war for space, more high-minded souls might suggest. Either way, the town is losing. It has been a very long time since it won at anything. More jobs disappear each year, and with them the people, and the forest devours one or two more abandoned houses each season.
This here isn't stream of consciousness. It's not thoughts like in The Paper Menagerie or in Drive My Car, but the focus here on her posters of the outside world and of the forest devouring the abandoned houses tells us about this girl's emotional state. This town is dying, and she wants out. She longs to see the rest of the world, and it's all done without physicalizing, describing, or even really any introspection. And part of all of this, the focus of our prose, how we capture things, is really about the metaphors and similes that we use, something that I think that Hilma Wolitzer is absolutely fantastic at.
Sometimes I made use of the fathers of friends, not that those selfish girls were really willing to share, but there were times when I sat next to real fathers in movie theaters with the exquisite texture of a man's coat brushing my arm. And I listened to the sound of their voices with the happiness of a dog that has no use for words and is desperately alert to tone and pitch and timbre.
This comparison Hilma Wolitzer makes to a dog here in Waiting for Daddy gives us this feeling of wanting to impress, of admiration, even adoration. And remember how we talked about descriptive focus? Well, highlighting the texture of the man's coat here makes something really precious for her out of something that would be entirely ordinary for anyone else. This feeling of deep longing arises from every line here. Now, you might be thinking that this is only really going to work in first person or third limited because those tend to have a lot more character packed into how they tell the story, but no, absolutely not. Beartown is written in third person omniscient and it is packed with emotional subtext on every level, every description, all the time. A lot of people, especially in fantasy and science fiction circles, write in third person omniscient. If we go back to those 3 beats, I think a lot of people feel that 1 and 2 kind of have to be done in this objective, standoffish way, particularly in regards to metaphors. They go for the thing that is necessarily the most beautiful, the most accurate, but that really doesn't have to be the case, and it's a place ripe for you building in a lot more emotion. But be creative in transitions and summaries and descriptions, all sorts of stuff. Having a variety of all of this, all these different ways to capture emotion from moment to moment is super important, and it helps. Part 5, Avoiding Melodrama. Writing powerful emotions without coming off as George Lucas trying to convince me he knows what sadness is hard. Now, the reality is that sometimes people will think your writing is melodramatic because you haven't sold them on the conflict or the stakes or the characters, meaning the problem is chapters back. And they're getting to this point and they're thinking, oh, the characters are being melodramatic, I don't really care about this. But that doesn't mean that you can't do certain things to avoid melodrama in the moment. Have a listen to this. So, where do we go from here? He whispered. I don't know, she cried, throwing her arms up. The man spun on his heel to face the window, slamming his fist against the glass. It wasn't meant to be like this. He stole a breath. We were meant to be happy and fall in love and die all together. She rolled her eyes, fingers scraping through her hair, then wailed intensely. You never saw us for what we really were. Us? He whimpered. He stormed up to her, gritting his teeth. There never was any us, clearly, just you and him. She fell to her knees before him, hands clasped. Please, she begged. Give me another chance. I'll try better. There are a bunch of things that I would not do with this passage, and it's kind of similar in those ways to some of the writing that I've encountered in the past. Firstly, every line is treated as this big physical moment, throwing arms up, spinning on his heel, wailing intensely, slamming his fist, storming up to her, begging on her knees, but not everything we feel comes out in physical reactions, especially dramatic, visceral ones like these. I know this comes from a place of trying to communicate the emotional importance of these lines, but this close together, isn't relatable for a lot of people, and it feels melodramatic. And it doesn't help that secondly, you get emotional whiplash in this scene. What I mean is that she goes from rolling her eyes to wailing intensely in an instant, falling to her knees before him. We don't get build up to these big physical moments, they just happen suddenly. Capturing emotion is just as much about the times that people try to control and hide or not feel things. It creates an emotional tension that eventually comes undone. But there's none of that here. There's no subtext, it's all on the surface. Big physical moments can work, like characters falling to their knees and begging, but we tend to want to build up to these. Thirdly, dialogue tags and grammar. We've got cried, whispered, wailed, whimpered, begged, all in this short moment. Now, I've talked before about dialogue tags and how we use them. Go check that video out. But again, it comes from trying to communicate the emotional importance behind these lines. But here's the thing. The word said encompasses a lot of the ways we talk. People naturally read intensity and pauses into dialogue on their own. So these verbs wave a little red flag to us, then say, hey, this is a lot more dramatic, just remember that. And the same is really with the exclamation marks and ellipses and capitals. This many, this close together, make it feel very dramatized. It's hitting you over the head with a baseball bat. Be emotional, be sad, this is bad things. When a lot of this emotion really would have come out pretty naturally without it. And the reader's just begging you to stop bludgeoning them. They're like, yeah, I know it's meant to be dramatic, please stop. Fifthly, just like we discussed, I think that the constant bodily expressions really undermine the pace in what should be fast-paced scenes. It's like there's these giant gaps between all their lines, what they're saying. Now, we don't see it here, but the last thing that is a really common marker of melodramatic prose is excessive poeticism. And I am very guilty of this because, so often, we fall down this rabbit hole of similes and metaphors and poetics to describe emotion, but it can become really ungrounded, detached. Strange that this person is being so esoteric and lofty and up in the air. So when I read, "It was a deep abyss, a hole inside her that never ended, where all the wind went dead and the stars were black and the leaves of fate fell where they may, casting her down and leaving her a discarded rag of fear and hopelessness," it just doesn't feel grounded, right? Now, I know, again, that this comes from trying to deepen the emotion in stuff that we cannot easily describe, that we feel like we can't really capture any other way, so we turn to big metaphors. But hey, look at that passage from the Testaments. It has 4 distinct poeticisms, but Edward made sure that they were still pretty grounded, relatable, and it's mixed in with a bunch of introspection. That balance and variety is really important to make those metaphors land. And if your poeticism isn't communicating what you hope to readers, if they just feel a little bit detached after reading it, then it might be coming across to readers as melodramatic. So instead, I want to show you a passage that does have a big physical, emotional reaction, but it isn't melodramatic.
Instead, Miyumi drifted upstairs to Hoshiko's old room, glass in hand. The moment she set foot inside, she tripped on an old power cord, hit the ground, the red wine spilling everywhere, a blood stain soaking into the floor of a dead girl's room. She seized a rag to scrub it out, but it only spread, fainter but more permanent. The carpet was too far gone already, but she refused to stop, scrubbing more vigorously, violently, because a stain was allowed anywhere in the house but there. The moment she stopped trying was the moment it'd be there forever. She worked till her knuckles were red and sore, until she broke. Miyumi slid to the ground. Tears came whether she wanted them or not, silently at first, then sobbing into the puddle of soap and alcohol, squeezing the rag as if to strangle it. When she brought herself up, she sat back against what used to be Hoshiko's bed. What used to be Hoshiko's old wooden carving of Ami no Kaku lay discarded beside her. It was sporting a new layer of dust. She wiped it away with the edge of her dress and put it back up on what had once been Hoshiko's bedside table. But the room didn't belong to Miyumi either. It wasn't hers to pack away. It all existed in some limbo of ownership left in the small print of life. She wanted to retch, throw up, and rid herself of whatever was inside her, but her body refused. After wiping her face, she downed a sleeping pill and collapsed onto her bed.
Miyumi here is sobbing into a puddle of soap and alcohol in her grief, but she doesn't start there. We see her trying to hold the emotion back. There's that emotional subtext before it gets the best of her. It's a lot more relatable with a real build-up. We kind of anticipate this moment. It goes from drifting to tripping to scrubbing to sobbing. There's no real emotional whiplash. There's also no ellipses or exclamation marks because I think the dramatic tension stands here on its own. There's a little poeticism, yeah, but it's balanced out with introspection and grounded descriptions of real things. And that, my children, is actually from the sci-fi novel that I am writing at the moment. I'm about 60,000 words in, and I want to have it out with beta readers before the end of the year. But if patience is not your virtue, then I would love to share with you a story I published with Orion's Belt magazine. I'm very proud of it. It's called A Catalogue for the End of Humanity, and you can find it totally for free down in the description below. Describing the same emotion over and over can also come across as melodramatic to readers because they tend to get numb to it. Like, you could be writing the same thing and they would feel it's just being a bit overdramatic because they're used to it. They feel like, oh, I wish they were doing something else, right? Especially though if you're just increasing the severity and not the complexity, you're not deepening the emotion. Oh, they're depressed, but now it's Depression 2, Electric Boogaloo, and Depression 3, Loneliness Comes for Free. As someone who reads a lot of mental health focused fiction, I am no stranger to this. My book has a character dealing with grief over and over, and I took a leaf out of these books in learning how to do that. Because it wasn't just about increasing the severity of the emotion, it was about giving the emotion a new context to explore, deepening it. So at the start of my book, Miyumi is grieving for her dead child. She feels lost, isolated, stuck in this depressive loop. Then, as she begins to heal, she starts to reconnect with her husband, who she kind of separated with in the wake of it, but slowly realizes that the more time she spends with him, the more she is reminded of the past and feels trapped back there, all that pain. Finally, starting a new life of sorts, she is racked with guilt over letting herself be happy, because it's like she's forgetting her daughter. These are all grief, right? But they're different expressions that arise from and change the direction of the story. Emotional journeys, stories heavily dependent on this kind of emotional change, really need this exploration of what the emotion actually is. So, ask yourself, what new aspect of that emotion or what question is your character faced with every time that they fall back into that same emotion? Give how they feel or deal with it a unique consequence that doesn't just feel like the story is going in circles. Of course, sometimes going in circles is the point. BoJack Horseman repeatedly has BoJack fall into the same self-destructive, self-loathing state, and that's kinda the tragedy. It feels like a cycle, it feels inescapable because it's trying to capture that experience for a lot of people. So, emotion comes out in prose, it comes out in introspection, it comes out in description, in transitions, but there's a whole big part of it that we haven't discussed. A huge chunk of it comes out in Part 6, dialogue.
Comrade, I did not want to kill you. If you jumped in here again, I would not do it, if you would be sensible, too. I see you're a man like me. I thought of your hand grenades, of your bayonet, of your rifle. Now I see your wife, and your face, and our fellowship. Forgive me, comrade. We always see it too late. Take 20 years of my life, comrade, and stand up. Take more, for I do not know what I can even attempt to do with it now. I will write to your wife. She must hear it from me. I will tell her everything I've told you. She shall not suffer. I will help her. And your parents, too. And your child.
A ton of emotion comes out in how people talk, their speed, the tangents they go on, the amount of words they use, stuttering, ellipses, interrupting, and you know all this, right? You use this in your writing. This is emotion that's coded into the text without even naming it. And just like with the focus of our prose we talked about before, people typically don't say, I'm sad, or I'm happy. They say, oh, it was the worst day at work. There was this Karen who had this expired voucher and wouldn't leave the store no matter what I said, and I was meant to be closing, but they wouldn't let me go, and I was just trying not to cry, but she kept yelling at me. They describe what is making them feel, which is also what makes this dialogue here so damn good. He's feeling guilty and ashamed and sorrowful, but he describes the reasoning behind his decisions, what he sees, the things that impacted him most, as a way of almost convincing himself that he's an okay person. That's what this is. He's not talking to anyone else, not really. Watch my video on subtext in dialogue, which covers a lot more of this in more depth. Secondly, contradictions between body language and dialogue can reveal emotional subtext. She relaxes and pushes my bangs from my face. What did he do? He didn't do anything. Maya, I don't know what happened. I stare at the rusted brown mixing with the bright red on my fingertips. Maya insists that she doesn't know what happened, but the way she avoids her mother's gaze tells us that she does, and she's just not ready to talk about it. The contradiction here gives a secondary emotion to the dialogue without saying Maya felt anxious or she shifted uneasily. Thirdly, differences in their usual speaking patterns. In All Quiet on the Western Front, the main character is largely pretty short-spoken throughout the novel, and this massive ramble tells us that he's feeling lost. He's vocalizing this internal mess of emotions. It's spilling out of him in a way that it hasn't before, really. Disproportionate responses, characters exploding at the smallest thing can indicate hidden emotions, both in dialogue and action. And lastly, implication. That is a huge part of how we speak. Passive aggression, flirting, being diplomatic in difficult situations. In these moments, you can enrich your dialogue with emotional subtext, especially if you think about what their goal is in any given scene. Watch the video again on subtext in dialogue. It's linked in the corner of the screen. But sometimes people do really cool things with emotion. They think outside the box because part 6, who even needs words? I want to give a quick mention to House of Leaves by Marcia Danielewski and Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. We've looked at how grammar and formatting can undermine the emotion, it can make it melodramatic, but both of these guys use grammar and formatting to represent the emotions and experiences of their characters. John Green has intrusive thoughts show up in capitals to represent them being louder than the rest of her mind. There's no commas or full stops or semicolons to represent this spiraling mess and panic of thoughts. There's no structure to them, it's all feeling inside her mind. Likewise, Danielewski begins to spread his words across the page to represent a character feeling themselves shrink, getting more lost than ever. They are just a flicker in the dark. These might not fit your book. I mean, sometimes it just doesn't, right? But these are other ways of showing emotion that you shouldn't be afraid to be creative with. And also, I'm having to show you like pictures and videos of other people's copies because I lent this out and I don't know who, and my copy is missing. So if you have my copy of House of Leaves, please do let me know in the comments, and that'd be great. And so having learned all of this is a great time to go and pick up your cat and give them a cuddle. But we are not done here. I have created a companion video to this where we go through 10 more examples of great emotional writing that I couldn't really fit into this video, like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, some Game of Thrones stuff. Get access to the series with a Curiosity Nebula Stream bundle, which is linked down below. It barely costs anything for the entire year, plus everything I make ad-free, a ton of other creators who are all amazing, their exclusive series as well, plus Curiosity Stream itself comes with a whole host of educational documentaries, like ones with David Attenborough, all on its own, which are just great for world building. My link is down below. Please do let me know what you think of the Beyond Writing series, what you would like to see there. Thank you, by the way, for making it possible for me to sponsor my own videos with my own stuff. That is cool. You know what, I'm feeling tired. Every step is me lifting a lead block. So I'm gonna take some character action, and we're gonna bring this together into a summary. Number 1, it's okay to tell rather than show in small moments, or to keep up the pace, or during transitions. 2, being specific when describing emotion helps ground the reader in a unique, immersive experience. Think carefully about the secondary meanings of words and avoid very and extremely adverbs. People tend to glance over cliches, right? 3, show emotions by physicalizing, using character action, giving narrative consequences that connect the scenes by their emotions. 4, don't restrict emotional writing to the aftermath section of any story or scene. Look at how you can use them in transitions and summaries and descriptions of people, places, or events. This includes in third-person omniscient. It doesn't need to be objective. 5, introspection is crucial to deepening emotional experiences beyond showing. Keep in mind what the character would focus on in describing or which poeticisms they would use. 6, avoid melodrama by building up to big physical reactions, showing people trying to hide, control, or moderate emotions, using dramatic tags and grammar sparingly, and avoiding excessive poeticism. 7, emotion in dialogue comes from people describing the things that make them feel. Contradictions between what they say and body language, differences in speaking patterns, disproportionate responses, and implication. And 8, grammar and formatting can also be used poetically to represent emotional states. Stay nerdy and cuddle your cat for the future.